Our speaker's name is Jack Cumming. He is an actuary by trade, graduate of Princeton, and a graduate student in history at NYU. Jack is a 6-year member of a retirement community in it just slipped me, yes. Carlsbad by the Sea. And Jack is a certified aging service professional. So he has not only academic and professional certifications in his own field, but in the aging services as well. There is one matter that it may be helpful for everybody to be aware of. When our speaker, Jack Cumming, speaks of CALCRA, that is our California-wide organization. When he speaks of NACRA, that is the National Association. There has been a history of some friction between the California organization and the National Association. It is my own personal hope that that will soon be a thing of the past. And I wanted you all to be aware of when Jack says CALCRA, he means the California. When he means NACRA, it is the National. Okay, without further ado then, Jack Cumming, thanks for being with us today, Jack.
Well, thank you, John. That was quite an introduction. And since he mentioned that, can you see me over this microphone? Yeah, okay. Can you hear me okay in the back?
Yes.
Okay. Since he mentioned that this certified aging services professional, I should tell you a little bit about this. When I moved into a CCRC, I assumed this was a well-regulated and financially sound industry. So I was, as an actuary, I just assumed that it would be regulated in the same way insurance is regulated, so that if a promise is made to you, that it's likely the promise is going to be fulfilled. So when I moved in and found that wasn't the case, that came as a bit of a surprise, and so that's how I got active. And I remember I went first to a CALCRA meeting and got an idea of where they were and what they thought, and then I started getting involved with the providers in their organization to try to understand their thinking and why there was this void. And along the way, I thought I should learn what they do. So I tried to find the qualification programs that they use to qualify to be your executive directors or CEOs or CFOs or whatever it is. And I found that the National Provider Organization had a program, this Certified Aging Services Professional Program, where you qualify by examinations to become expert in this field. So I signed up for that and took those exams, and I qualified. I think I'm the only resident who's done it. And not too many providers in California go that route because of the examination requirement. They've developed a separate program called Emerge in California that doesn't involve any examinations, and their feeling was that having examinations was too difficult for the kind of people who go to work in this industry. So that's my background. I ought to better explain why I have all these many things. First, I want to thank John for arranging this. I'm not sure how he stumbled across me, because although I've been a CALCRA member for many, many years, there wasn't much of an opening in CALCRA, so I got involved with the national people and found a home there. And I really appreciate Dorothy Rice for getting me from the airport over here, so that was nice. I hope I can get back. The topic is the evolving CCRC, how safe is your future? And I guess the safe is because, as you know, there's been a growing number of bankruptcies in this field. And we'll get into some of that as we go along. But, and I want this to be a conversation and be open, but I'm going to ask that you hold your questions. One time I tried to do it completely open and we got off the track. So I've got a lot of material to share, and I'm going to just share it rapid fire with you. Hope you keep up, and if you don't, that's okay. And then we'll go forward. First though, how many of you are CALCRA members? And I guess I am, almost all of you. How many of you are NACRA members? That's unfortunate. Okay, now you're on your handout, you've got the website for NACRA, and we'll get more of that. How many of you are members of Leading Age California? Now that's a trick question. Leading Age California is the providers organization. How many of you are members of the provider organization? You all are. You all are.
And we don't know it.
And you don't know it because they did something very astute. Some years ago, when CALCRA decided to withdraw from NACRA, Leading Age California, the providers, felt that the residents should have representation. So they changed their bylaws so that every resident in a facility in California is ipso facto, just by the mere fact of their residence, a member of Leading Age California, and they claim to represent the residents. That gave them clout in Sacramento. They can say they represent the residents, and the CALCRA only represents a part of it. Very, very bright. How many of you have a Type A contract, a full care inclusive contract? Do you know whether you do or don't? You pay more if you go to the care center?
Yeah, we do, all of us.
Yeah, okay, well that's not as common as you might imagine. So you don't have that protection, all right. Pardon?
We all have a
Have
contract.
10 free days every year there.
Pardon? Okay, that's a Type B contract, good.
No.
Pardon? Did somebody say?
That's written into the early contracts. It isn't anymore.
Okay, all right.
We have to pay when we
That's
go.
what I thought. Okay, we're doing. How many of you understand how the medical deduction is calculated? I didn't think so. But anyways, since CALCRA arranged the meeting, let's start with a word about CALCRA. And I think you all know CALCRA's purpose, but I'll just share it with you. This is from their website, because I'm really not a CALCRA insider. CALCRA's purpose is to enhance the quality of life and financial security of CCRC residents. They've tried to create a climate of cooperation. This goal can only be achieved through trust. This includes considering mutual concerns and suggestions with an open mind and providing full disclosure of all financial and non-financial data. So that's CALCRA's mission statement. And they pursued that through legislation, and CALCRA has a remarkable list of legislative achievements to its credit. These achievements fall into the categories of keeping residents informed, promoting resident participation, financial disclosure, and establishing procedures. As far as I know, there's nothing in there about contract regulation or financial regulation. But clearly, CALCRA needs and deserves your support. So if there's a CALCRA, why is there a NACRA? Well, first, CALCRA is California focused, but some issues are nationwide. ABHAL, for example, doesn't only do business in California. So if they were to take some reserves or something, move them somewhere else, who's watching that little storehouse? So there are issues that go beyond the boundaries of the state of California. There are also, so we've already talked about that. There's also federal legislation. We have the new Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010. How is that going to impact us? And who's looking at that? And that's something we're looking at. And we can develop, there are some things that we've done. Do you remember imputed interest? There was a time when people were imputed interest on their entrance fees. And that was something NACRA got rid of. We also got the Resident Right to Return Home Act, which was an important law and something that's under attack now with the new healthcare law. That says that if you're a CCRC resident and you are hospitalized and released to a care center, you have the right to return to the care center at the facility where you live. Because under managed care, many organizations may have lower rates at other facilities, so they may want to return you to another facility. So we have a law that says you have a right to return home to your own CCRC afterwards. And with the new Affordable Care Act, there's a question whether we're going to be able to sustain that, but we're working on it. But let me say a word about our priorities in NACRA. First is the security of resident investments in their entrance fees and stewardship for their use. Second is something that's a little technical, but that's to introduce accounting integrity. Today's accounting has problems, which I'll come to in a minute. We also want to maintain equity among and between cohorts of residents, between generations of residents. If the move-in generation shouldn't have a better deal than the later generation, and the later generation shouldn't have a better deal than the move-in generation. It's as simple as that. These questions of equity are not really addressed. So we're doing this by trying to shift the provider mentality from doing things for residents to doing them with residents. And from what I found here, your community is better at doing that than ours is, to be quite frank, because our organization, Front Porch, is, well, they keep to themselves pretty much. But some of the things that we've done, NACRA has a booth at industry meetings where we meet with the providers and talk about what we're trying to accomplish. We have panel presentations at all the industry conferences. We've developed concepts for best practices. We produce consumer guides. We've drafted model laws. You've got a list of a bunch of model laws there, and I'll talk more about them in a second. And we have this resident learning website where you can get all sorts of information. You can not only get information about CCRC living, but we have a nice course on China today, if you're interested in that. And I think it's very interesting what's going on in China today, or on how people, Islamic people, think about Islam through their own eyes, etc. But we didn't want to just have it be the leadership group in NACRA brainstorming. The things I just named were things we thought residents probably ought to be worried about: financial security, equity, etc. So we did a focus group at our meeting in Virginia last April. And I was a little surprised what it came up with, and it's something that came up here just a few minutes ago. That was the top concern of residents in that meeting was the shift of risk from the providers onto residents. When the industry began, the providers shielded the residents from risk by giving them a full care inclusive contract. That's moved now first toward the 10 days a year, some 30 days a year, and now to a full fee for service, and they rationalize it by saying, gee, it's wonderful, because if you don't ever use it, then you don't have to spend the money. I can assure you that the pricing is still as high as it was when it was a full care inclusive contract. What's gone up are executive salaries, but that's another matter. So if you look at your handout, some residents feel duped. Now all of the options, if you look at the last page of your handout, you can see what the cost is that you might expect to incur should you need long-term care. This is the probable distribution of long-term care costs per month by age. And you'll see that it's quite substantial. I think most people underestimate it, so when they compare a community that offers a full care inclusive contract with one that doesn't, they don't have a quantitative basis for making the comparison. But the other thing is that mathematically, all of these contract options, which are on the flip side of that page, that lists most of the contract options that providers are offering today, and most of them only offer one or two options. Those are all mathematically interchangeable. They're equated, they can be equated to each other. And the providers then say, yes, but we can't afford to take the risk. The risk can be reinsured. The providers don't have to take the risk. So they could offer all those options to anybody moving in and make that a matter of personal preference for the individual moving in to suit their needs. Excuse me, I've got a runny nose, this Bay Area weather. That's my nose running. And so people who have long-term care insurance, Kendall Corporation, for example, in Pennsylvania, makes an allowance for that. If you assign your long-term care over to them, they reduce the amount of the monthly fee. Makes sense. Anyway, the other matters, and I'll just go over them quickly because we don't have a lot of time. That was the one that surprised me the most. The other matters that this resident focus group, if you will, thought mattered are things you might expect. They want more transparency. They want to have resident representation on boards. People are concerned that increasing operating costs are leading to increasing monthly fees. They're afraid they're going to outlive their assets. They're worried about the increase in the number of fees for services. Services that once were provided suddenly are unbundled, and the provider can change the contract unilaterally just by issuing a new page for the resident handbook. So, that's of concern. They're worried about the prospect of higher healthcare costs, who isn't? And they're concerned about the lowering of entry standards. They see people moving in who are frailer and frailer at the time they come into residency. And that's of concern because they're saying, how is that going to affect the availability of services that I'm relying on as a resident? Now, why isn't CALCRA affiliated with NACRA? And that's a long tale. I went over with Dorothy before, but anyway, the first is there's a belief in CALCRA that NACRA is provider friendly. And I'm going to say that's true, because after all, the providers hold the cards. We all were friendly to providers when we moved in. We all turned over our assets to the providers, trusting that they would do the right thing for us. So we have a relationship with the providers, whether we like it or not. We can't demonize them. We have to embrace them and find a way to bring them to understand our perspective. Second, there's a belief that CCRC regulation is at the state level, and that's true. But as you can see here, on that list of model laws, we're putting together a set of uniform model laws that could apply across the country so that there could be the same kind of interaction, activity, reciprocity that you have in the insurance area. In the insurance area, the individual states don't have the resources to do the job, so they have the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. They put together their resources and pool it so that they can do the job that's needed. That's been pretty effective. Why haven't they done it for us in CCRCs? So where does this leave us? Well, CALCRA needs you. NACRA needs you. We need you, because membership is a challenge for us. That's something we're working on, and I think we're going to get some changes going. Leading Age California, the provider organization, they've got you. So these others need you, but they've got you. And from what I've read and been told, CALCRA's current legislative agenda is relatively simple. First, CALCRA sought to have CCRC oversight move from the Department of Social Services to the Department of Insurance, and so far the providers have succeeded in opposing that. So they see that as a threat because they have very comfortable regulation with the Department of Social Services. I should tell you, the Department of Social Services has 5,000 employees, and there are 8 who are charged with regulating CCRCs, and only one of them is qualified as an attorney. The others are support staff. Second, CALCRA intends to introduce legislation to elevate the current resident representatives to be full voting members of the provider board. But before I get into the NACRA part, let me just mention one thing. We have a meeting coming up in Sacramento. In preparation for that, one of the actuaries who's involved wrote a note to Walt Rosette at CALCRA, and he said, can you share with me the written proposal for moving the regulation from the Department of Social Services to the Department of Insurance? Because the Department of Insurance would need the authority to improve the oversight. In other words, it'd have to be statutory authority to allow the oversight, or there's no point in just moving it. And that's the reason why the Department of Insurance didn't embrace the idea originally. Well, this gives a perfect segue into this model laws handout, which you have. And let me talk about what we need. And I'm going to do it in just 3 areas with a 4th aside. First, contracts. How many of you fully understood your contract when you signed it? Exactly. I mean, we shouldn't be asked to enter into a contract which we don't even understand. And I'm fortunate because I don't like to use my own provider as a negative example all the time. So I'm fortunate because my sister's moving into a CCRC, not mine, to a different provider organization. And here's an actual sentence from the contract she was required to sign. I understand and agree that at any time and from time to time, all without notice to me and without affecting your rights or my obligations hereunder, you may alter any terms of the residence agreement or any part of it, including renewing, compromising, extending, or accelerating, or otherwise changing the time for payment of amounts due thereunder. In other words, it's a totally one-sided deal. So you say, well, how could that possibly be? I mean, it takes a lawyer, a really pretty good lawyer, to put together a set of words like that. So I went to Bob Thompson, who regulates contracts. He's an attorney, and he regulates contracts in the state of California. I said, do you approve this contract? He said, well, I don't recall whether we approved it or not, but we would approve it because there's nothing in that that's contrary to statute. There's nothing in it that's contrary to statute. So my sister and her lawyer went back to the provider, and they said, this contract, so the attorney said, the contract's so one-sided, I can't advise my client to sign it. And the provider said, we're not allowed to change a word in the contract because the state of California approved the contract, so you have to sign it as it's written. And my sister wanted to move in, so she signed that contract. That's just not right. We need protection. We should have protection. The next thing is bankruptcy risk. And I have no reason to think that there's a risk here for ABHAL. From what I can see, it's pretty well managed. After all, they've moved the risk onto the residents, right? So they don't have that exposure at this point. However, in the event of a failure, we all put up huge amounts of money in entrance fees. In the event of a failure, we're just general creditors. The bondholders, just passive investors, they come before us. Our entrance fees are used to secure their interest. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, in insurance, you're protected against loss. If an insurance company fails, the policyholders are 100% protected against loss. We don't have that protection, and we're much more vulnerable as a group than the policyholders of insurance companies are in general. We need to have a guarantee law in place to provide that protection, and one of the model laws that we've developed in NACRA provides that protection. Third, we deserve to have believable promises. You're induced to move in here by, we have good food, we have nice apartments, we're going to take care of you, all of these good things. These are believable promises. And insurance policyholders are shielded from loss, wrong place, are required, insurance companies are required to establish reserves to ensure that the contractual promises that they make are backed by adequate financial resources. CCRCs not only aren't required to do that, they only do it if they retain an actuary, and I don't believe ABHAL has actuaries. I believe they rely solely on the accounting. The accountants, God bless them, tried to simplify this, and they adopted an accounting standard based on life expectancy that is simply flawed, and so it front-ends the money. So the CCRC gets more of your income from your interest fee early in your residency. Late in your residency, when the money is most needed, it's gone. The last thing that I want to mention, which isn't in those model laws, but it's just sort of something interesting to think about. We move in to get a continuing care contract. We pay a huge amount. We invest in that contract. It's a big investment for most of us. For some people, they sell their homes. They give up their ownership in their home to raise the equity to have the money to do it. But we don't get the same protection that investors get against blue sky offerings. You don't get an investment prospectus when you move in. The investment laws, the blue sky laws, the state blue sky laws, the SEC, none of those laws protect us on this investment that's made in a continuing care contract. I'm not sure how they're exempted or whether they're exempted, but they certainly don't provide. At least I didn't get a prospectus when I moved in. Did any of you? No. I don't think so. So I hope that you'll join us in NACRA and CALCRA to make sure that your voice is heard and that your future is secure. And now, if you'd like, we can take some questions, or I can go on and talk about other stuff, but I see one hand up back there. You, sir, the man who has trouble seeing.
A few years ago, Ad Hoc
just a moment.
Corporation Cornerstone.
We want to give the mic to the, yeah, here. This
Who is, oh, okay.
Let him know that he's there.
A few years ago, Ad Hoc, which runs, I don't know, about 10 or a dozen CCRCs, mostly in California, set up some corporation Cornerstone, it seemed, for some speculative ventures. And now it has begun moving CCRCs into Cornerstone. It moved San Joaquin Gardens in Fresno from Abau somehow into Cornerstone. We were promised that was just to protect us from whatever speculative things go on in Fresno, which I don't understand. Is this something we should protest against?
I don't know enough about the specifics of that individual situation. It's certainly true that one 501c3 organization can donate assets to another 501c3 organization as a way of reorganizing, and it sounds like that may be what happened. But the core of your question, as I understand it, is what protection do we have from the possibility that the cash that they get, that floods in from the entrance fees, might be used for a speculative undertaking of some sort in the hope of benefiting somebody other than the residents. And right now, there is no legal protection against that. There is no regulation of CCRC investments. One of the laws that we've developed within NACRA that we're proposing, which was proposed actually by Dan Seeger, who's an interesting chap from Pennswood in Pennsylvania, would regulate CCRC investments at least the same level as life insurance company investments are regulated. I'll quickly tell you that that's a lot more liberal than you might think was appropriate for something that involves as much trust as you put into a provider organization. But there would be a beginning, and we thought that following a precedent was better than just going out and trying to do the whole thing all at once. So we have that proposal out there, but right now you have no protection. Those funds are available for them to use as they see fit, and it's their money. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I remember that a couple of years ago, Wisconsin Senator Cole made an investigation into CCRC issues, and the report has come out, I believe. Anything concrete result come out of that investigation?
All right. In July 2010, the Government Accountability Office did a study of CCRCs, which was entitled Secure Living or Risky Investment. The title tells you sort of what they were thinking. They they concluded that this is a very risky thing to ask seniors to go into. And at that time, the Senate Committee on Aging, which was then chaired by Senator Cole, he's since left the Senate, held a hearing and concluded that there was a need for regulation of this industry, that regulation was almost non-existent in all the states, but even in some states that seemed to have a semblance of regulation, like California, that the regulation didn't go to the core of the matters that we've been talking about here today, for example. And they felt that it was inappropriate for that to be handled at the federal level, so they urged the states to step up and take the lead on that. Now the lead would be, if it were going to be taken by the states, would be taken by the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. They've been too busy trying to implement the new Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, so they don't have any extra resources, which is why we went ahead and tried to help out by producing a set of model laws, and I think there are like 14 or 15 of them. And it's our hope that eventually the NAIC may take over that activity, but since we followed very closely these precedents, we're hopeful that we can get some. But that was to respond to that call that there be something for the states to adopt. Denise?
Yeah,
I guess you got to get the microphone, although I can hear you perfectly well.
generally people can.
That's what I meant.
I think you're on a really important topic here that Joe brought up. One is the spending of our money outside of California, where there is no regulation at all, as far as I know. And the how could NACRA help within the state of getting some enforcement of what we have, or taking up some of the issues that you said were common to most residents in CCRCs. We just have the organization in California. So the question is, how could NACRA help us in what we're trying to achieve by ourselves?
Well, I think that in union there's strength, in division there's weakness. So it's our fervent hope within NACRA that CALCRA will eventually rejoin us instead of being at odds with us. I mean, you know, we're all trying to do the same thing, so let's come together and let's work together. And so it's been heartbreaking for me, and I put a lot of energy last fall into trying to bring CALCRA forward, and then CALCRA met in October and decided that they weren't going to. So, you know, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but you still have to move on and move forward, so we're moving forward. I think that as a result of that, it's very unlikely that California is going to lead the way. I think California will probably follow along behind the others. And you know, NACRA doesn't have the kind of resources that CALCRA has. So, and CALCRA's resources are pretty limited. So without working together, we've divided all those limited resources. The money's not there to really advance it. Now, we can make the case intellectually. We have this this panel on Thursday in Sacramento that NACRA had a hand in putting together, where we're going to be meeting with state legislatures and really exploring this, similar to what New York State did back in 1984 that led to good regulation there, the Arden House Conference. And what they did was to have an all-day-long symposium, create a transcript of it, publish it in a book, and it became the foundation for the New York Code of Laws. We're hoping to do a similar thing, and possibly for California. We've got the cooperation of the McGeorge School of Law, but we're pushing against the hill because CALCRA is pushing the other way. So, you know, we're doing the best we can. That's all I can say, and I hope that CALCRA will join with us and become a fervent partner in trying to protect the residents as best we can. What can I tell you? Yes.
Thank you. I'm very new here. My name is Annette. So I've met a few of you, but I haven't met everyone. I've only been here for 2 weeks. You keep referring to the Department of Social Services. Is that the Department of Social Services are the Department of Health and Human Services.
Okay, well first, I'll tell you, I moved in, I was fairly young when I moved in, and you have not made a mistake. You will be very glad for your decision to come here. So,
That's reassuring.
I think that the communal living, this idea that people are selling, that people want to grow old in the isolation of their own home, and some people are very good at solitude. I'm not. But anyway, for those people who love solitude, that's a good choice. But anyway, I think you're going to find that the communal living is a good thing, and you're glad you're here. And although Abhow might be able to do more, and Front Porch might be able to do more, and the provider could have more vision, you've made a good choice. Now,
my children would agree.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear. But having said that, this is the Department of Social Services, a department of 5,000 employees,
Okay.
and this was viewed as a social service undertaking.
Right.
There's some strange laws in California. Uniquely in California, independent living must be licensed, if it is CCRC, must be licensed for assisted living. So the providers don't have the same sense of urgency that we may have, because they can simply allow their CCRCs to become assisted living communities, and they don't have to get any new licensure or anything. That can just evolve with the market forces.
Yes.
Whereas we would like to have a more vibrant living environment. That's a different,
Right.
Aim.
Yeah, I have a couple of follow-up questions. The Wellness Center is overseen by which state agency? Which one accredits them?
We don't, where I live, we
DHHS?
don't have a wellness center, so I wouldn't have a clue.
I guess what I'm getting at is if we move to oversight by the Department of Insurance in California, does that in any way jeopardize the medical tax deduction, which we get partially, I believe, because of the skilled nursing facility here?
Okay, let me answer that. You got a couple of questions all coming together.
Okay.
One thing I should have made very clear from the outset, which I didn't, and I mea culpa on that, and that is that the health and safety aspects are very tightly regulated, perhaps over-regulated, because the regulation tends to be reactive. So that area, so what we're talking about here is contract. There are no contract standards to speak of. And so the contract and financial oversight is what we're talking about getting a better handle on. Now I've already slipped a cock on the other piece of...
Okay, I do that all the time. So my question was, if we're overseen by the Department of Insurance, which I do not believe has oversight of the skilled nursing facility or the wellness center.
The medical deduction.
Does that affect that medical deduction? Because I don't know any of us who can, unless we have huge expenses, can deduct our health care insurance anyway.
Well, there's a very good article called, if you go on Google and look for gold at the end of the rainbow, you'll get everything you ever wanted to know about that medical deduction. The medical deduction, the part of your entrance fee which is deductible, is for the prepaid portion of the health care.
Right.
And because where you have the kind of contract you have here, there's very little that's prepaid because you're going to pay it later when it comes due. That deduction is overstated and is already in jeopardy, and the IRS could shut that down at any time. So because these providers, in order to compete in the marketplace, overstate that deduction. They tend to overstate it unless they're a full care inclusive type A contract, in which case the deduction makes a lot of sense. However, there are some aspects to it. If you're in assisted living, or if you're receiving assisted living in an independent living apartment, then 100% of everything you pay is tax deductible. That's something that a lot of people are not aware of. And so there are a lot of aspects to it. So what you're talking about is that allocation that they go through, and that paper, which is written by Rob Walker, who's a pretty good CPA who specializes in this area, will answer any questions you could possibly have. And I can Well, I better not say anything because I might be wrong. But I can say that the way our provider does it is clearly flawed. And I've yet to see a provider that makes that calculation appropriately according to the rules promulgated by the IRS. But the IRS isn't that interested, so they don't really oversee it very much.
Thank you.
Denise?
I understand that in Pennsylvania, the CCRCs are regulated by the Department of Insurance. And there was a big one that when Erickson, I think, went bankrupt. And the government of Pennsylvania's spokesman said, or as I recall it, that they had too many of them with so many creative accounting principles at work within them, trying to keep out of bankruptcy, that it was too much for their Department of Insurance to handle. Until somebody set some regulations on their accounting principles, there was little to be done to stop them from bankruptcy. Could you address that? Because I understand that our organization here has done such delightful, creative accounting that none of us can understand it at all, even our accountant residents. And I don't think they should be able to do that. I don't think Pennsylvania thinks so either.
What you said about Pennsylvania, you're talking about the Covenant at Covenant, I think it was Covenant Village, but at South Hills. Okay. The Covenant community at South Hills. It went bankrupt, and the residents lost their entrance fees 100%. They were just, it was like they never had that money, it was gone, you know, on their own. Same thing happened with Pacific Homes here in California. And what you've done, what the insurance commissioner in Pennsylvania said, he's a political appointee, is exactly just what you just said. And if you want to, he doesn't just say it for CCRCs. If you read the Penn Treaty Insurance Company bankruptcy, you'll find that the insurance commissioner there is questionable, I guess. I guess he wanted his job to be easier than it's proving to be. But you have made the case for these model laws that we've put together in NACRA better than anybody else I've heard. So if these laws were in place, these problems would not be occurring. It's as simple as that.
How many states has Department of Insurance in charge of CCRC?
I don't have an exact count. Most states don't regulate CCRCs at all. So they're just free to do anything they darn well please. Subject to the general business rules. You know, we do have the covenant of good faith and fair dealing that requires that anybody who contracts with you and makes you a promise is, in return for consideration, is required to adhere to a covenant, a common law covenant of good faith and fair dealing. That's not that often enforced by the courts, but it is there, and it's a possibility. In most of the states, CCRCs are regulated by the insurance department. In the states with the strongest regulation, and I would say that's New York, North Carolina, and Florida, it is under the Department of Insurance. There's no uniformity, however, between the New York laws, the North Carolina laws, and the Florida laws, even though we're dealing with the same thing. And clearly there's a need for that, and the result is that there are unevennesses even within those states that are well regulated, but they're still better off than states that have little more than a Bill of Rights. You know, California's a Bill of Rights state, so you've got a Bill of Rights, and you're free to go try to enforce them if you want. Yes?
In the case of resident ownership, the people who are in charge, the board directors and so on, how do they give up their investment? What is the process? Do the residents buy them out?
I think what are you talking about the cooperative form of organization I talked about at lunchtime?
Yes.
Okay. we didn't get into that. One of the model laws that is on this sheet that you've got in front of you, you can go see the actual text of these on the internet if you want. Right? One of the model laws would provide a basis by which you could convert gradually from having executive ownership to resident ownership. If you move toward the number of pieces to that. First, the residents then get to choose the board of directors, but you know, residents don't know how to run a place, so you have to hire a manager to run it. And usually the manager is the existing provider. That's the usual transition. And it works pretty well because you automatically change the mentality of the provider when you're bringing them into this relationship. I've seen it work on the island of Manhattan in New York City, and it works because the rental stock in New York converted to cooperative over time. Now, to get to your answer, the challenge is, the reason why you don't want to use a condominium is the challenge on death. You want to be able to turn those apartments over quickly when people die, because unfortunately we have a tendency to do that in these parts. We try not to, but it happens to us. And so with a cooperative organization, that apartment can be made available for a new tenant immediately, whereas with a condominium, because it's in fee simple, it can be held up by the heirs for quite a while. Typically, the way the cooperatives, well-run cooperatives are run, you sell your shares back to the cooperative corporation at an assessed value, at an appraised value for what the current worth is. Very much like employee stock option plans work. But I'm getting way out of the depth of most people who want to get involved with it. I don't want to go too technical here. But there are means to really make it work. It works quite well in New York City generally. Every once in a while you have a runaway board and then you got a problem. But absent a runaway board, it can work quite well.
How many CCRC organizations went bankrupt in the past, let's say, 10 years?
In the past 10 years, probably 100.
Out of how many?
Well, okay, this is what Leading Age says. It's very few. It's less than 6%. So only 6% went bankrupt. So we don't need regulation because only 6% went bankrupt. But for the people in the 6%, I can assure you that it was traumatic. Now, our new incoming president-elect for NACRA, Ron Herring, he had no intention of being active. I had no intention of being active. I went to a CCRC to retire. I wanted to write a book on the Congress of Vienna, which is what interests me. I have strange interests. Ron Herring, who had been the CEO of Lutheran Family Services of Virginia, so he was in the nonprofit sector, he went there to retire, thinking he'd be safe because he's trusting nonprofits like the nonprofit industry he'd always worked on. After all, you know, if you're a nonprofit, you're certified good. You must be altruistic, right? So they went bankrupt, and he lost a bundle of money. Now he's very active. So that's how people become active. Anyway, I think this. I don't want to call you a young lady, but you're younger than I am, I think. So that makes you a young lady.
What are the next steps for us as a community? What do we need to do in order to help with this? I'm assuming that joining CALCRA is one, and maybe NACRA. But are there specific things that we should be working on?
All right.
And maybe I should address that to you and to John.
Well, I should say that I personally, we need to support a lot more than that. But right now you would have to join. We're working on developing a joint membership so that when people join, just like with AARP, you join the national organization, you're automatically enrolled in the state organization. We're working on doing that. We're stymied in California because of CALCRA's opposition to NACRA. And there's a reason for that, because Leading Age is the NACRA member. We accept, in NACRA, we accept providers as members. They don't dominate, believe me. The providers don't want this list of laws I've just been showing you. But we do listen to them, and we invite them into our councils, and we try to talk with them and to reason with them. And that CALCRA has found that to be inappropriate. And so there's a mindset there. Now, my experience with talking to residents is that most residents would rather see things worked out in harmony with providers. And so we feel pretty good about that. So I think if I were to say to any California, I'd say, if we could just get the division over so that we could be working together, that would be a huge step forward. Dorothy.
Thanks so much for coming, Jack. It's really been illuminating. I wondered who at the national level now is taking an interest in long-term care facilities. You know, one time there was Senator Pepper, who did so much. Who, on the Senate side or the Congress side, who is taking an interest and a lead in this area?
Well, Al Frankel, of all people, has something of an interest in it. He's kind of a strangely articulate fella, but if you want an individual. But there is, with the failure of the Class Act, which was going to be a cash program, they're forming a commission to try to develop solutions for long-term care. And the Senate got to appoint 6 members, the House appointed 6, and the White House appoints 3. So the Senate and the House have appointed their 6 each, so there are 12 commissioners. And the Class Act failed because they tried to adopt a law that was contrary to actuarial principles, and it couldn't compute. So I asked the national person, Cheryl Phillips, when she was in Sacramento recently, I said, well, since you just said that the Class Act failed because of actuarial principles, and now you've got a commission to come up with a proposal to address these issues going forward, of the 12 people who are already appointed, how many are actuaries? And she said, 0. That was her answer, 0. So they're going down the same old road. I think that we have an opportunity in NACRA to take the intellectual high ground and to win the respect of the industry and win the respect of the Congress and take this country forward. And I think that's what we're going to do.
Good luck.
Well, we've done it before, we can do it again. Any more questions?
Well, I understand that the CALCRA is trying to explore the possibility of making the organization 501c3 organization so that they get more money and make activity more stronger. What is the current situation?
Repeat the question.
The question was, CALCRA currently, and I'm not involved in CALCRA. You know, when I first moved in, I wanted to be involved. I'm just a member because, you know, they've got an insider group that sort of works that group. But my understanding is that it's now a 501c4.
Yes.
Which is an organization like a homeowners organization that can advocate for things, but you don't get a tax deduction for donations to it, and they want to become a 501c3. And I think they're studying that right now. NACRA is already a 501c3, so if you want to give us money and take a tax deduction, go right ahead.
Oh.
We're all set to accept it. However, CALCRA is just, I think they're studying, I don't know, do any of the CALCRA people, board member, are you on the board, Denise? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, is it just under study, or?
Yes.
So,
just under study. Right.
It's not hard to do, and they could still do a certain amount of advocacy, but they'd have to be more than just a lobbying organization.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they do that. See, NACRA's primary mission is educational. So we have the NACRA U website, which is full of educational material. I don't know if the CALCRA would, I don't know how that'll work.
Well, historically, if we've been able to accomplish anything, it's been through lobbying.
Yeah.
And we are hesitant to get that up, I think, because it's.
And I think that's, my understanding is that Leading Age of California, the provider organization, has been a 501c3. It is now in the process of changing to be a 501c4 because they're spending more of their revenue on lobbying than they're allowed to under the Internal Revenue rules. So your adversary's going in the other direction. I don't know whether that's meaningful. Anyway, are there any more questions, or you want to wind it up? Thank you all very much. Thank you.